koshertube.com. Type in Tanya.
Tanya.
And there's a little box if you're looking for and it has all the previous classes.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think
sorry,
this is
Tanya, and then what is the website?
KosherTube.
KosherTube. What is it, like YouTube except kosher?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah. There's like I say on that. This is I think the 10th or 11th class. So you have them all lined up when you do Tanya. In other words, when you in the box KosherTube, you just put Tanya, and then they're all follow.
So start with one and work yourself down.
You can do as you wish. I'm just showing you where it is. So the last page, you guys are all the way back there, far there, eh? So you're all the way back there, okay? I guess you good? Okay. So we dealt with in the third chapter, as we mentioned, kind of like an X-ray of the neshama itself, the soul, the godly soul. And if you remember, we pointed out something interesting, which takes us along the Peirik. It puts the Peirik in a clear perspective. We pointed out that as much as he speaks about the godly soul over here in this chapter, he doesn't mention a word of the godly soul performing Torah mitzvahs. And we asked the question, again, not to elaborate much on what we already had discussed last week, but we asked the question that why, if you're dealing with the neshama of the soul, the godly soul, which is a part of God, you go through a whole chapter describing this godly soul without mentioning the soul's investment or the soul's involvement of Torah mitzvahs. With Torah mitzvahs, the answer we gave that the soul prior, we give an example, the soul prior it comes into this physical world. It's all connected to God. It's like it says, Chatzuva mitachat kisei hakavod. It is carved from the holy throne, and it sits together in the same domain as the Almighty. As we said, even more than that, it is part of the Almighty, part of God. But in the same token, it cannot perform any Torah mitzvahs. It cannot put on tefillin, and it cannot shake a little of an esrog. It cannot learn Torah the way we learn Torah over here. It cannot utter the words of Torah. It doesn't have a mouth. So it's divested from the whole bodily world. And so what's the experience of the neshama? What's the experience of the soul when it's in Gan Eden? It loves God, it fears God, it constantly experiences and appreciates and derives much pleasure from God and godliness, like the Mishnah, the Medrash says, it derives pleasure from the ray of the divine. And in ways that we will never be able to, as much as we will try to describe this love and fear of the neshama, the way it's separate and divested from the body, we'll never even be able to touch even the tip of the iceberg. And we'll never be able to understand in no form or fashion what the neshama experiences in the heavens above. It's practically impossible, because the way when the neshama enters the body, it's in a total different plane. Completely different planes, a different reality. Now, the neshama isn't able to expose itself to a great degree, even it sits in the body, and that's the whole point of it, to bring out, to extract the specialty, the enormous positive and godly energy within the soul, even it's invested in the body. In order the body should follow the example of the soul, and God forbid not vice versa. But in the same token, it's limited by the confinement of the body, and hence it does not have the ability to express itself nowhere close. When it has love to Hashem, it's nowhere close the way the neshama is divested from the body, because it's not limited in no form or fashion. Then, when it leaves the body, when it's divested from the body, it's not limited in no form or fashion from the bodily restrictions and confinements. So we just use that as an example. Despite it sits and it's so close to God, it cannot perform Torah mitzvahs. The body, this soul, when it's in Gan Eden, in heaven, in the world to come. Similarly, and this is Alter Rebbe in this chapter, even though he's talking about the neshama the way it's in the body already, but it's dealing with the neshama from the perspective of the soul itself prior to its entry into the world of thought, speech, and action, where the deals with in the next chapter, in the fourth chapter, the Alter Rebbe begins. You could even see, not from these papers, you'll see in the fourth chapter, Alter Rebbe begins, additional to the neshama itself, the neshama has the three garments, which is the thought, the speech, the action, and it invests in the thought, speech, and action in order to perform Torah mitzvahs, right? When it has hand, it has the physical action, it could do the mitzvah, it could shake the lulav and esrog. If it has speech, it could utter the words of Torah. And if it has thought, it could think Torah. But prior to its investment in thought, speech, and action, the neshama is similar. Even again, we're dealing with the neshama the way it's invested in the body, but he deals with the perspective and dimension of the neshama prior to its total entry into those garments of thought, speech, and action. So we gave that in the introduction. That for that very reason, you have a whole chapter, dissecting the neshama and showing us what it's all about. It doesn't say a word about its performance of Torah mitzvahs, because here you're dealing with the neshama on its own prior to its investment into its garments. So we explained last week again the difference of Chachma, Bina, Das. As the neshama itself is divided into 10 levels, generally divided into the cognitive faculties and the emotional faculties. And this is not, as we said also, we pointed this out, it's not exclusive to the neshama, but we know that within our system we have the brain, the intellect, and then we have the emotions. And he pointed out also that the intellect produces emotions. Again, this is not exclusive to the neshama. When you understand something, you thoroughly understand something thoroughly about its importance, its virtues, its advantages, consequently, you develop a drive to it. You understand something thoroughly, that this is hazardous, it's no good, and it could be dangerous, it could be intimidating. You develop a feeling of fear. So that's what he calls Chachma and Bina, father and mother of the midat, of the emotions. Because just like father and mother produce children physically, so too the Chachma and Bina, they produce the feelings. And we mentioned again in brief, we said the Chachma and Bina, the two separate faculties. Each one is different, similar to the father's contribution and the mother's contribution to the birth of the child. The father's contribution is the nikuda. Mother's contribution is more the expounding on the nikuda. We said the initial entry into the gate of initial entry of understanding any concept is first. Again, we elaborated on this. We're not going to go over all the details, but the first entry into understanding something is the flash, the first initial flash. It's very strong, very potent. But in the same token, it's just a flash, while the Bina takes that initial flash and develops it. Both together produce a feeling. You need both, as we again pointed out towards the end of the class, how each one is important, similar to the child being born only in combination of father and mother. Similarly, you need the Chokhmah and the Bina. So now he's saying on what is the Nefesh Elikis. There's a little more, I would say, from all the chapters in this first segment of Tanya, the first, let's say, 18 chapters. This is a little bit of a more of a, I don't want to say complicated, a little more complex ideas, or introducing new ideas, but this is all it all there to actually, especially you see over here with the translation and the explanation. But we'll try to explain it as much as we can. In the same token, there's so much to talk about, even the next few words. But we'll try to keep it brief, or at least as much as we need to at least be able to go on with the pedic. So Alter Rebbe says over here, what is the godly soul thinking about? What is it intellectualizing? As we mentioned last week, also because it's a godly soul, it has only one thing in mind: godliness. Like we gave the example, when someone is an intelligent person, his whole investment, his life investment is in intellect. Tell him to do something, get involved in something which is not intellectual, it's not even a challenge for him, because it's not his world, his or her world at all. Similarly, we have, as we started the Pedic, the whole time you began, the first Pedic said that we have an animal soul, and then we have a godly soul. So in this chapter we're dealing with the godly soul, and the godly soul trying to understand the concept. What kind of concepts is the godly soul understanding? Only one. It has only one drive, or one interest, or one pursuit. Godly pursuit. If it has seichel, intellect, it pursues godly, it pursues to invest its intellect in godly reality, understanding godliness, nothing else. So the questions we ask ourselves, so we don't have no challenge. We all do have challenges to think about God and godliness, or think about anything else which is not necessarily godly, or maybe sometimes we're driven to things which are ungodly. obviously, we are already a combination of these two souls which enter into our system, and they're each fighting with each other. Each one wants to conquer the entire system, right? So the godly soul is sending these godly signals and messages: be godly, think godly, speak godly, do godly, and so on. And the animal soul is sending other messages, right? And that's the constant battle. Each one wants to take over the entire territory, which Lady Alter Rebbe so brilliantly says, the Irktan, each one wants to take over the entire body, the entire system, like two kings fighting for a territory. They won't compromise till they have it all. Especially when one, Alter Rebbe says something interesting. Again, I don't want to deviate from the focus of this perek. He says sometimes you find that someone starts davening right away, different thoughts come to him, right? Like, the guy who had this, they had a meeting, a very important meeting, and they couldn't come to a solution. So one guy says, hold on, let me daven mincha, I'll come back with something super, why? Because right when you start davening, sometimes all of a sudden different ideas start becoming clear, so to say, clear, right? And then you finish davening, you realize it didn't really make sense to begin. But the Alter Rebbe explains it, because when you start davening, it's like when you have a territory in the middle. Two kings are trying, as long as one king, they have an ongoing battle, and they periodically try to, move into the territory. But when one demonstrates that he's coming into the territory in full force, that evokes the other one to come in full force as well. That's why sometimes dafka when we're doing something good, dafka when we're davening, precisely when we're davening, that's when these thoughts come in, and that's when we find a greater struggle. And why so? I'm starting to daven, I'm coming close to Hashem. Why should, right then, all these thoughts come in, things that didn't even interest me before, won't interest me after? The answer: look at two kings trying to conquer a city. They could be, each one be somewhat subdued in his own place. As long as the other one's not showing, from time to time they always want to show control, but as long as they're both settled in their own place, they're not, so to say, jumpy to come in and conquer. When one wants to conquer, then that evokes the other one. Oh, you want to? I'm there in full force as well. Similarly, when we start davening and we do something good, so there's always challenges. There are always challenges indeed, right? Because when you're dealing with the person as a whole, when you're dealing with a person as a whole, there's when you're dealing with a person as a whole, so obviously there's the two neshamas. Each one is there and wants to conquer and wants to give its opinion in order that the entire system should follow that influence. The godly soul wants to influence the system to be godly. The animal soul wants the system to be animalistic. But in this perek, when we mentioned before that the godly soul has no challenge, is because you're dealing solely from the perspective of the godly soul. This whole perek Gimel is all about the godly soul. So when the godly soul wants to utilize its intellectual faculties, its cognitive faculties, what is it intellectualizing? God, nothing more, because that's what its makeup is. It's a godly soul. So we begin in the top of the page, because the seichel in the intellectual soul, which is again dealing with the godly soul, when it ponders and it thinks deeply in the greatness of Hashem, now in these one line, or here it's 3 lines, right? 3 short lines. It's a few words which you find across the Chassidus, starting from the Alter Rebbe, and each one is a revolutionary concept on its own merit, which ultimately encapsulates God's presence as much as the human mind could attain, could understand, could comprehend God the way it can relate to God. And ultimately, this is the way God functions as well. In other words, this is from the godly perspective and from the neshama perspective, how it perceives godliness. So the first words are memala kol almin, how the Hashem fills the worlds. That's a important thought process which the godly soul absorbs, which arouses within itself a interest and a drive to God and godliness. When we say memala kol almin, so the Gemara is based on the Gemara. So you look at the Gemara says, Ma neshama malas haguf, kacha kadosh baruch hu malas adam. Just like the soul fills the body, so too God fills the worlds. In other words, when you look at the soul filling the body, there's something very special about it in a way that you see the magic of the neshama, which ultimately, and we're not talking about particularly the godly soul, the way the soul enters into the body, there's something very special, maybe even magical about it, because if you see the different multiple functions of every limb and organ, and you see that the nefesh is really connected to that particular function. Take, for example, the eye. The eye has the koach, this beautiful koach which Hashem gifted us that we're able to see with our eyes. When you think about the eye, how does the eye function? It's obviously not the physical eyeball which sees solely the physical eyeball. Chas v'shalom, a person after 120, or let's say a person sleeping, let's say, okay, then his eyes are closed, but let's say after 120, the eyeball is there, it cannot see, right? So it's not the eyeball itself which allows the person to see. There's a combination of two factors over here. One is the physical eyeball, and then there is a soul energy which is encloses itself in the eyeball, and together the person could see. Take each one, separate each one from the other, right? That spiritual, that soul which gives the person the ability to see. If there is no eyeball to be the vessel in order where it would invest in, that cannot see. You need the physical eyeball. In the same token, the physical eyeball itself is not something that could see on its own, right? You need the combination of both. Now, if you think about it, you have sometimes different devices. You have the tape recorder, or you have, let's say, a radio, alarm clock. Sometimes you can put the same battery and it'll make all three work. By the soul, it doesn't work that way. There's called the koach hariyah. There's a part of the soul which conforms to the physicality of the eyeball. And you took that koach and you put it in the eardrum, it would not work. It's like sometimes you have different plugs, different types of plugs to different systems. And even though they have in common, they're all drawing energy from the generator, but they have a different way how they make that device work. Similarly, the soul, it's not just like one battery fits all, one size fits all, not at all. There is a koach which is called koach hariyah, which it's a spiritual energy, but it only finds its place and fit in the eye. There's called a koach hashmiya, which is the audio, and the only place that it finds it's in the physical eardrum. That's where it is. If you took that koach and put it in the eye, you would not be able to see. And so too is the koach hiluch of walking, talking, smelling. Every function of the person, there is another type of energy which enters into that. So you see over here, and it fits perfect in the problem when a person can't see. It's because sometimes there's no synchronicity between the two, or synthesis between the two. So you see over here, it fits, and it's there in order. The koach hariyah, for example, is there only to make the eyeball see, and so too the hearing and so on. Similarly, the Gemara says, when you see this multiplicity in this world, you see even look at something simple example. You see the apple and the orange, two fruits. Why did this become an apple? Why did it become an orange? Right? Because you planted the apple seed. But why the apple seed produces the apple? If it's all a certain energy which is there within the ground in order to produce, why do you find so many different multiple plants? And let's say take the apple and the orange. The answer is because there's a certain godly energy which is investing in the apple, and it has many similarities to the physical apple. That's what makes the physical apple look the way it does, because there is a godly energy which is entering precisely into the apple, and that energy is not entering into the orange. So the orange has a godly energy which makes it look like an orange. And obviously the color of that godly energy is not color orange, because the whole color and feel and looks, that's all physical. It's associated with the physical realm. But yet in the same token, the energy which produces the orange is not the same energy which produces the apple. Had it been the same, they would look the same. And if you think about the enormous, like the Gemara is trying to bring out the greatness of Hashem, how many millions and maybe even billions, probably billions, right, of different parts of this creation, and how this creation, this physical world is divided in two. between the inanimate, the tzamech, the world of vegetation, the world of chai, animal, creatures, human beings, and the diversity, the differences between human beings, you notice the enormous koach of Hashem. Despite, it's not like I say, one battery fits all. It's Hashem right now entering into that being, creating it, as we mentioned as well. It's not Hashem just created 6,000 years ago. It's another idea, which is not for now. But just to point out, Hashem right now is creating that created being, an entity, in a way that it should look and function exactly the way it looks and functions. If it's this type of snake or this type of creature, everything. So you see the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu just from the way Hashem enters and fills the worlds. And again, this is on this world. And then you have so many multiple, the expression later of Alter Rebbe says, Kate's infinite amount of worlds of Olam Haba and Gan Eden, and none of them are the same. And that's what makes them so different. This is this world, like the difference of the inanimate and the world of vegetation and so on. The reason why the reason why they look different is because they're on different levels. And so you look at, even looking at something which we can relate to, which everything which is in this world, and we know there's so much multiplicity, and yet, and each one has its function, and each one has its role, and each one gets its food a certain way. And you notice and you understand that it's not that Hashem just stuck one battery and things are just happening, but memale kol almin, Hashem fills every minute detail of all the worlds, including this world, and that's why that particular created being, creature, functions the way it does. And that itself is such a morabu masecha, magodlu masecha, how great. This is one of the expression, or one of the concepts which the godly soul invests in and gets excited about God, from the fact that Hashem is memale kol almin, He fills in every small being which exists within the world, and that's the way that particular being functions. And that's again enormous excitement if we think about it in great detail. We put our minds to it, and in length, and we elaborate on this greatness, or this dimension of the greatness of Hashem. So the neshama gets very excited. The neshama will ultimately become excited with this. It'll also, like we said, last week we explained last week, that the intellect ultimately produces feelings. A person eventually has a drive to such a great God, which is memale kol almin. So from thinking about it, contemplating on it, pondering on this concept, it produces ultimately a midah, which is, it produces a feeling. So the first level of, or the first step in its pondering on the greatness of God, he starts with memale kol almin. Then he crosses over to a new concept, a new dimension in God, which is called soviv kol almin. Soviv kol almin, when I say it's new, because it's something which is totally different. And let's go back to the way it is in the way we look at ourselves and we understand ourselves. If you notice, within the system of the person, there is something, some koach, some energy, some structured koach, which is by definition a transcendent koach. Think about the koach of Ratzin. And it says in a number of places in Chassidus that Ratzin is very similar to understand. When you understand Ratzin, I'll explain in a moment, they're very similar to the phenomenon of soviv kol almin. So let's take it one step back. We think to ourselves, when we say God invests into every detail of the world, one would say, well, ultimately, if He's so busy, if Hashem is so busy getting involved in every intricate detail, I guess that maybe you can say that God Himself is kind of limited to the limitations of this which He's vivifying, right? If Hashem is so involved in every single intricate detail of this creation, and the orange and the apple, so somewhat part of God is, like part of God is part of the orange, part of God is part of the apple, and part of God is part of the bean or the animal, and so on, because Hashem is investing the way the animal or the orange looks and feels and functions, is because Hashem is giving it that particular function. So if you think about it, Hashem is all about, and so invested in creation, he's coming almost part of the creation. Well, he's maybe the battery behind it. He's not actually the physical orange, but one would say theoretically that he's so involved. It's like somebody is building cameras, as an example, right? So he's so involved in the details, right? There's so many details if you want to build cameras. So his whole day is in building cameras, and it's not just like he goes by, he gives a blow, the camera happens. That would be, in the connection to that would be a kind of transcendent connection, because you don't get involved into intricate details of the camera. You're not getting your hands dirty, let's say, or you're not getting your hands into the smallest details, minute details of the camera. But the way we actually build a camera, right, is when someone builds a camera, so he is involved. This has to go here and this has to go there. So all his life and whatever he stands for is in the world of the camera. You won't say that he's a camera. You won't give him such a stamp and you say, well, you're just as like the camera because you're involved. Well, I'm the builder of the camera. So this is the camera and I'm the builder of the camera, so I stand higher, maybe a bit removed. But I can't say I'm completely removed if the whole day and a whole night, or let's say a whole day, my total occupation is building cameras. So my whole world is building cameras. So in a sense, I'm kind of almost limited to the details of the camera because that's my whole focus. That's all what I do. So apparently one's going to say the same thing on God, that he's so involved memali kolam, and he fills in all the details, the intricate details of the world. So in a sense, it's limiting to a degree, right? He's still the creator, the one on the other side of the picture, right? He's still the force and energy which is creating the orange and the apple, but he's so involved, he's memali, so involved in filling the worlds. Apparently, that puts as kind of a stamp of limitation on this great God. He is truly the creator, but when he's involved in all these intricate details, to some degree, he's kind of limited to the way these details look like. And that's certainly not the case. That's not the case. God is definitely transcendent from being involved in these details. So he's involved. He is involved. But that's not what that's not where he begins and where he ends. To the extent, I'll tell you, it's an interesting expression. One of the great Kabbalists, which lived a few hundred years ago, he said, he said the expression was I forget there's another word, but he said this is not what God is all about, that he creates worlds. Creating worlds is something which is a total inferior expression of God. That's not what God's all about. So, in one hand, so much is happening. He's creating all this. And if the more we think deeper into the mysteries of creation, you notice that we didn't even scratch. It's not even the tip of the iceberg of the greatness and the complexity of this creation. Again, ultimately, the greatness of the Creator. True. But ultimately, that's not God's greatness, that he's involved in this. Because if you would say that's where God begins and that's where God ends, that he's a creator of worlds, and let's say all these different levels which we even see in front of our own eyes in this world, to a certain extent it gives a certain stamp of limitation in God. Like we said before, he's not the camera, but his life is camera. To say God is all, that's where he begins, that's where it ends, to a great extent you're saying, well, God's all about creation. Because in Memala Kolam, we make sure the orange looks like the orange and the apple looks like the apple, and so many things happening, and this is one little detail, but he's so much involved. If that's where he begins, that's where he ends. To a certain extent, again, it's a kind of limiting God. That's what we know, Sof Kolam. Truly Hashem is transcendent of all that. Now we'll understand, it'll give two little examples. Let's say this individual, which is one is just a little bit to get to understand an initial state into this, what Sevel Kalam is all about. But sometimes a lot of things could happen, and one could be involved in so much. In the same token, it's not an effort for him. It's not where, for example, let's say some professor is going to go give an important speech, which so many other professors are waiting to hear for months, and he walks from his car to the hall, and he walks over a whole flat of pebbles, right? Think about it. Under these pebbles, there's a world. There's ants, and there's creatures and sand and everything, right? By his few steps that he took from here to there to give that speech as an example, he changed the whole reality under these pebbles. the ants were, he moved one stone and another stone, and the ants had to lost their place, and he built and maybe he did something good also. The ants were trying to pull a stone, he just walked across and the stones were put in position. It's a very silly example, right? So someone's going to say, this professor came that night, he accomplished two major things. One, he gave a speech, and he impressed the whole crowd. On the other ones, he built these few castles for the ants under these things. No normal person's going to say something like that, even though that's what he really did. He really did two things. He built these few castles for the ants or whatever's under there, and he said this speech. But no one would ever attribute the greatness of this professor. He did two things. He gave a speech that night. Whatever he did other than that, he did it. It was his footsteps who did it. In the same token, he's completely transcendent of whatever would happen then at the time, right? Whatever happened under those pebbles which he was walking over. Similarly, we say Hashem is Sovev Kolam means to say he hovers over all the worlds. In other words, he's involved. There's nothing happens other than Hashem. But that's not what Hashem is all about, that he's a creator of worlds or giving energy to all these intricate details of the world. He does. No one else does it. Nobody else does it. It's only God what makes the apple look like the apple and the orange look like the orange. But Hashem himself is Sovev Kolam, and he's transcendent. So this example we gave just to introduce ourselves to this concept, how we can understand that a creator, Hashem's greatness, is much greater and beyond the Mamalik Kolam. He is Sovev. Sovev means, it doesn't mean he's physically hovering over. No, he is the energy of everything. But where he is for himself by himself. He is God. Additional to that, he becomes a creator, and the way he creates, he invests in every single minute detail which exists within creation. But who is he? He is Sovev Kolam. He's transcendent of his Olam. But again, to say this, the more important example, which gives us a greater understanding of this phenomenon of Sovev Kolam, even going back to ourselves, certainly within the person, there's all these specific energies which give every function its function. Like we said before, the eyeball has a koach, which is koach hariyah, to see. The ear is the eardrum is that koach of audio, and so on and so forth. And every limb has a function, right? In the same token, there's always a transcendent koach within the human being as well. Take, for example, someone is an athlete, right? There's enormous healthy energy which invests into his feet. He probably exercised, right? He cultivated that energy and became a very, very quick. He became a quick runner, and he's in front of the line and running. And he'll run extremely quick because there's a healthy koach hahiluch. There's a healthy koach of walking, running, and moving along, right? What if this person doesn't mean that because he has that, that's why he's always running? Not at all. What if this athlete stops and sits down and says, I'm not running? What do you mean you're not running? What do you mean you're sitting next to the guy who, now you look like the same guy the guy who doesn't even know how to run. He crawls like a turtle. You look exactly like him, right? Right now I'm not in the mood of running. But you're a runner. You're an athlete. You're everything about you. You're in the front page here and the front page there. Everything about you is an athlete. What do you mean you're just sitting? Expression in Hebrew, labali. Not interested now. And I want to rest, or right now I'm not interested. And the question is, if everything was about him, let's say about this, that he has a healthy koach hahiluch, which means his feet, the combination, that synthesis between the physical foot and the energy, which is going to combination of the physical foot and the energy which goes into it, is so healthy and so structured that he's so easy for him to run across the world, right? Across the city, or so far and so quick. What does it mean he's sitting? The answer is that within the person himself, there is always something which is dominant over all the particular kochot. What is that? The person's desire. I want or I don't want. If I want to do it, I will do it. I don't want to do it, I won't do it. Now, obviously, we shouldn't take this out of context. There's some things that we have to do even if we don't want, right? We're talking about the service of God, not always we want, but we're not talking about the Avodas Hashem right now. We're talking about the way it works physically within the body. It's not because we have this Mamale idea, right? Mamale Kolam, that It's not where the person begins and the person ends. That he has all these different functions, and every function, every limb has another energy, which makes that function. That's not where it begins. That's also where it ends. Within the person himself, there's something which is transcendent, which is my desire. I want or I don't want. That koach haratzain is enormous. It practically controls everything. To the extent, it says if you don't want to look at something, even though, I don't want to run, I sit. There's the koach haratzin, that's clear, black and white. You don't want to run, you'll sit. Your eyes are open. But my eyes are open. The koach haratzin, by definition, truly has such override over any of the particular functions that your eyes could be open. If you're really, truly, genuinely not interested in looking at that, you won't see it. And similar to hearing, they used to say that someone, if you don't want to hear something, God created a little extra piece, put it inside because you're not supposed to hear that. That's a nice thing, that sometimes a person needs, sometimes because his koach haratzin is kind of blurred as well, unfortunately. He blurred it, he tainted it, he stained it perhaps. And you have to close your eyes physically or not be in a certain place, but by definition, the koach haratzin is the most dominant koach over the person. It's so transcendent and also doesn't have a particular area within the body. Where's the koach haratzin? It's everywhere. And you know what? It's everywhere and nowhere in the same time. It's in my hand now, that's why my hand is moving. I don't want to move my hand, I won't. But could you say that it's in my fingers in a way that it enters mitlabesh, which means invests, and it's intrinsically connected to my fingers? Not at all. It's because it's everywhere, so you cannot say it's intrinsically connected to any particular place or limb. But because it's not intrinsically connected to every limb, as the limb expresses itself with that particular function, that's why it's so powerful, because it doesn't have a particular place within the person. Thus, it's not limited to the particular place. The power of writing is here. It's not in my feet. Right? Normal people don't write. Maybe someone could do something cool, let's say, and get used to something because he wants to perform and make money, right? Walk on his hands. But normal a person writes with his hand. So the power of writing is here, and it's intrinsically connected to fingers and to the way the brain functions via the fingers. Jumping, running, dancing is usually in the feet. The koach haratzin, which is that determination. I want or I don't want. It's everywhere, but it's not limited to a particular place. That's why it has the override over every single koach. I'm not interested in dancing. I'm not interested in writing. I'm not interested in running. I'm not interested in looking or hearing and so on. It's dominant because it's a transcendent koach. Similarly, when we deal with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when we deal with God, one of the definitions or one of the descriptions, if you could even use that word, description of God is Sof Kalam. He's that power, that generator, which doesn't get involved into the intricate details of creation, even though none of creation could be independent other than this Ratzon. Take back to the example of the person. When I do run, is it just like, okay, the Ratzon just made things happen, and then eventually my feet are running on their own? No. Every second that my feet are running is because the desire is there and saying run. So you see, as much as the running is really the combination of the particular koach hahiluch with the physical foot, the ratzon is so dominant, not only it triggers the initial move in order the person should run, but it's always there. The moment that I cease to desire to run, I'm not running. So you see how powerful it is. It does not get involved in the detail, but it's the only energy. There's another example given, which is a little more contemporary example, which is, I think it's a very, makes it even clearer, right? Take, for example, you have a generator out in the city, and you have the wiring which goes in through the walls, right, from the generator, the outlets which come out by the wall, and then that's where you plug in the vacuum cleaner, the toaster, and so on, right? So someone's going to say, what do you need, a generator? Or let's take it one step further, one step before. The generator, it's the great koach. That's why the things are happening. But the generator doesn't get involved in the measurement of electricity what needs to go into that vacuum cleaner. It's the force which stands usually out of the city is just a generator of life. The only thing is, you cannot plug the vacuum cleaner into the generator, it'll explode. So you need the outlets. In other words, the wiring should limit the energy which is coming from the generator in order to plug in the vacuum cleaner to be able to do its job. If it's a toaster or a vacuum cleaner or any other electronic device, right? And so someone's going to say, what do I need the plug? What do I need the generator? I take the vacuum cleaner, plug into the generator, it'll explode. I take it, I put it into the outlet, it works perfect. So who cares about who needs a generator? It's a silly thing to say. Because if you don't have the generator and you'll take the vacuum cleaner and put it into the outlet, it won't work. There has to be this generator outside of the city which does not get involved. It's just enormous energy, and it doesn't get involved in the intricate details of the amounts and the measurements of electricity that goes through in order to make the vacuum cleaner or the dryer or the toaster work, right? You need that as well. All right, because that's the car. That's just that generator, which has just it's an explosion of energy, which ultimately makes everything work. And the same thing, the Ratzon of man, like we said, it's not just it stands on the side; it's a transcendent koch. That's why it's such a dominant koch. But in the same token, it makes everything happen while it happens. The reason why you're looking and you want to look at it because you want to. The reason why you're running is you want to run. You cannot remove the two. You cannot remove the memale kol almin, the kochot, the way they're involved and invested in the details, similar to the energy which comes through, the measured according to the device, and with the you cannot remove it from the koch of the generator. They work in unison. That's the only. It was 5 to 9 already. Look, we'll stop over here, but let's just culminate over here this concept. And so, just similarly, you cannot say it the other way around. You cannot remove the idea that the wiring must be measured and draw a certain amount of electricity, because that's the only way the device will work. If someone's going to say, well, you have the generator, why can't I take the vacuum cleaner and put it into the generator? Why do I have to have because then it won't handle it. It'll be too strong. So the only way it works, it's really the generator together with the outlet. Each one without the other cannot work. Similarly, so when you look at the generator, you say, well, the generator is not getting, so to say, its hands dirty with the details, but the details cannot work without the generator. When you look at the Ratzon, which is enormous koach, it doesn't get, so this, let's use the word, it doesn't get its hands dirty with the specificities of the particular kochot of the person. Not at all. But without it, nothing will happen. It's just the perfect combination of the Ratzon and the particular koch. When they come together, then they function. He's running because he wants to run, and then he has a healthy foot. Similarly, when you think about Hashem, memale kol almin, sure Hashem is memale kol almin. He makes sure that everything works exactly just so, that everything has its exact measurement, and not only measurement, its style, and therefore the outcome, the creation. Again, like we said before, the apple looks like the apple, and the orange looks like the orange. There's a particular energy which is coming through and creating the apple like the apple, and the orange like the orange. And that's enormous, because you think about it's not only apples and oranges, right? We think about the millions and billions of different multiple types of creations, and Hashem is involved in each one to make it work in that way. But obviously no one's going to ever say that that's where Hashem begins and ends, that he's creating and he's involved in the different details. So true, he's in this side of the coin. He's the creator. He's not the actual apple, but on the other hand, that limits God, and they say that's where God begins and God ends. Not at all. God's the generator, which doesn't get involved. In other words, the generator itself on its own is a transcendent koch. It's removed, like the Ratzon. And the same thing within God. Sovev kol almin. He is the all-encompassing. He is the energy itself before he would get involved in the malakam. So ultimately, each one cannot function without the other. In other words, when we see a world, we understand that certainly there's a koch memale kol almin. And together with that, we understand that there's the generator, which is like the Ratzon, God, the way he's for himself, by himself, sovev. It doesn't mean physically surrounding. He's the way the energy is reserved. In other words, the way he's by himself. Like the Ratzon, it's a transcendent koch. And that is sovev kol almin, which is so different in character than the memale kol almin. The sovev kol almin is similar to the Ratzon, the power of desire, to determination. Then next week we'll learn another concept, which is another concept. All these three, not to lose sight, is encapsulates the the God's function the way we understand it. In other words, God's function the way He established the things. That's how He functions. So when the godly soul switches on his interest or its pursuit to intellectualizing godliness, the first thing it's going to think about the way God presented Himself. Memali kolalman, seviv kolalman. And then again, we're going to learn the godly soul understands this profoundly because it's a part of God. Right away, as it's going to say in the line right after that, Noila, that produces world of feelings. Start with love and fear because he thinks he has a thorough and comprehensive understanding of this mamala kalam, seviv kalam, and kula kamei kala chashiv that ignites, that will automatically produce a feeling, maybe love or fear, depends on what dimension of this these godly concepts he's thinking about. So again, to keep it in the context over here, last week we defined what the Chachma Bina is. Here he says what type of Chachma Bina, in what way is the Chachma Bina, what is it pursuing? It's pursuing its understanding, its thorough and comprehensive understanding in godliness. And he speaks about godliness, he says, first of all, Hashem is Memala Kalamin, then Seviv Kalamin. God willing, next week we'll learn about the third idea, Kula Kamei Kala Chashiv. And the next words, if you see, is Nilda, that gives birth, and that arouses a feeling of fear, and so on and so forth, or love, etc. Have a good night.